also represent water and sewer authorities. So at my sewer plants, all the, we call it the biosolids, but I take 5-gallon cans home with biosolids, which I want to thank you all for your contributions. I take those home, and actually we used to give it to Dan here quite a bit for his lilies. But so not that I go too much here, but biosolids are what's called soft fertilizers. There's hard fertilizers, which are the Scott's products, which is your nitrates and phosphates, which are really hard, and they're really tough because they'll burn your grass. But biosolids is amazing, and the thing is, you would not, if I gave you a can of biosolids, you would not know the difference between very rich mushroom manure and biosolids. You can't. The smell is gone. I felt that kind of good stuff.
I don't know about the smell being gone, especially when it rains, but.
Can I interject one more?
Sure.
Speaking of what you're talking about, many years ago, 40, 50, I'm not sure. I worked in a sewage treatment plant on the Vanport. And on the drying beds, the guys that worked it were growing tomatoes. And these things were nice and big.
Well, let me just paraphrase what you just said. They didn't grow them, they actually were naturally occurring tomato plants. But you're absolutely right. Is it, again, a quick thing here is that I took the can of it home, obviously, every year I do, or multiple cans really. So we have, do you ever see that plant called elephant ears? They have this like nice leaf that's about this big. So being the engineer that I am, it says, so we put one elephant ear bulb on once on the left and one elephant ear on the right. So one we just had just natural ground and topsoil around it. The other we packed it with fertilizer. So the one elephant ear group was about this big, about the size of a big plate. Well, the elephant ears with the biosolids in them were they're bigger than a garbage can. They were like, it looked like you were in the tropics or something. So I can't overemphasize the need to take that product and reintroduce it into the system, because it is a very valuable resource. But enough of that.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah. I sell real estate and we have state meetings. A couple years ago, we were talking about sludge. Where,
You mean biosolids, right?
Yeah, I mean, I live in the city, Indiana Township. Okay, but it was an issue that we started to work on to try to restrict it, where farmers will buy this stuff. You have to explain what it is in detail. And they would put that over their fields, and it smelled like hell. And I don't think it was real healthy either, but maybe you could.
So that would be either cow manure or horse manure. If you're, on the way over to Hershey, you get a good smell of that. But our stuff is grade A. And if you go to Home Depot and you look at, it's not Vegemite, it's Morganite. And what we do is we take the sludge, they run it through a rabbit pelletizing, one of those machines that creates pellets, and they put it in bags and we sell it to you and you don't even know the difference.
Dan, can I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
Is there any connection between the MS4 program and the issues that Alcosan is facing in terms of having to separate storm and sanitary sewers in the city? Because that's a huge project that.
No.
Okay.
But Alcosan does have a combined sewer system.
Right.
And so what happens is that because it's too expensive to separate 120-year-old sewers, is that they're forced to be putting now like little treatment plants on their storm sewers.
Yeah.
Very expensive.
Yeah. Do any sanitary sewers in the township ultimately flow into Alcosan, or are we separate?
Yes.
Okay. So that may impact, again, this is tangential, but ultimately that may have some impact on the rates those citizens might be paying.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So, we're part of the consent orders with Alcosan, unfortunately.
Okay. I guess my last question is, are combined sewers an issue in the township? Are there many of them, or?
None, we are all separate.
Okay, good, thank you.
But Alcosan, and those residents that are in the Middle Road District and others, they're looking at a $5.6 billion project. So, with a B.
And just so you know, the majority of the township is serviced by Deer Creek. However, there, I think the EPA has been looking at Deer Creek and the Allegheny Joint Sewer Authority and stuff, so they're probably going to go in the same direction at some point in time.
So who is Deer Creek here? So, real quick story. So the township, since our citizens go to Deer Creek, or Allegheny Valley Joint Sewer Authority, we went down there and the township faithfully negotiated cost for an expansion of the plant as proposed by their engineer. And I think it was $42 million was their estimate to do it. So the Allegheny Valley, in good faith, went out and borrowed $60 million, thinking that, that they would be covered, because at that time, the rates were about 2%, a little bit less. And so the engineer designed it, put it out for bid, and it came in at $92 million. So now they're gonna be trying to find additional funding to bridge between 60 million. So those of you that are, contribute to Deer Creek, it wasn't me.
Excuse me, do you mean the tripling of my current sewer bill is still not enough?
My guess is the answer is yes. Unfortunately.
Okay. Are we done with the MS4?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next item is revisions to the PRD section of the township zoning ordinance. I think at our last meeting, we left off on page 7. I drew my line just above the point D, the buffer area. Is there any?
Buffer areas. So, if we could go back to page 6,
Okay.
our, I guess, buffer areas, okay. All right, if we go back to page 6 on your setbacks, let me,
Okay. Can I,
sure,
let's go through the rest of this
okay.
comment, then we'll go back to the beginning and go over what we went over last time, just to make sure
Okay.
we're all on the same page.
So, okay, on buffer areas. So, just a little bit of history, just for the board and the audience on buffer areas, this having to do with PRDs. With the original concept behind a PRD is, we keep looking at these small areas, like whatever, the minimum is 10 acres, obviously. But we look at these PRDs that are coming in, that are roughly about 50 acres. Really, when the MPC was looking at these, they were looking for much larger areas. And hence, a lot of the original verbiage had to do with a variety of type and use in them. And the concept behind them is that these would almost be a self-contained little village, if you want to think of it that way, where they would have a laundromat, they would have a rec center, they would have a restaurant, they would have, down at Verona, if you look at that one, they were very similar to that. So because it was basically a self-contained village, that's why they put a buffer system around it. It wasn't that a house in, let's say, where Blue Run development just is going in. That single family isn't any different than any other. And the house numbers are very comparable. And so when we start talking about buffers and what it's for, you have to understand a little bit about the history and what they're for. And I would venture to say is why have them at all? If all you're gonna do is be using the PRD structure to develop, property instead of a subdivision. I mean, why have a buffer at all? Why subtract that, what I would call very valuable property around the border anyways? Nevertheless, PRDs all have them, and, that's just so you understand the history behind it. But other than that, I have no comments.
And I put in, Kevin put this portion in italics, which is my suggestion that we not allow any portion of any lot to extend to the buffer area. I think under the current ordinance, you can't have a part of a lot in the buffer area. The problem is, eventually people will say, that's my property, I wanna put a shed back there or something, in which case now you're kind of destroying the concept of the buffer area.
So we've never had a PRD where a lot transgressed into a buffer.
And I think there have been a couple, might have been fairly minor, but there were a couple of pieces.
Okay, I mean, we do allow grading into the buffer area at times, but we never allowed.
Well, anyway, it doesn't hurt to have that. in
Yeah, I
there.
think that's a good addition.
Clarifies.
Okay.
No, I think, Dan, I'm in favor of that change, and I just point out that, this does have the effect of, helping preserve, undeveloped land, which I suspect in MS4 is not a bad thing either. In that, it's the common area, you know, the buffer area, as you describe it, can't be built on, number one. Number two, only 50% of the buffer area can be included in the calculation of common open space. So that's gonna require more common open space otherwise in the development, so I think this is fine.
Yeah, I'd like to get back to that once we finish going through this.
Okay,
But I'm okay with that, I'm okay with the impervious coverage.
we go on to page 8 then?
Yep. You know, next comment I have is on roads and parking, but.
Okay, what's your comment?
So, halfway down the paragraph, it says, every single-family dwelling unit is required to have access to a paved street. I would strike out single-family, every dwelling unit, I don't care what they are. Multifamily, you name it, I don't really care.
That's a good suggestion.
So just take out single family there.
Right.
Yeah, every dwelling unit has to have access to a paved street. And the red part, common parking areas, you can tell I read this afternoon, can't you? Common parking areas open to use by all residents and their guests within a PRD. I would strike out may be permitted. I would put in shall be permitted so that the total number of off-street parking areas exceed two spaces per each unit development. Here's my thought behind it, this was based on discussion from 2 months ago, is let's say, for instance, the house or whatever it is, the townhouse that's developed, is only for like a single garage. And really what would be nice is if we had accommodations in off-street parking that would, I don't care how you do it, if they do have 2 garages there, then good, they can put 2 cars there. If they only build 1 garage, they have to go put another spot someplace else, some off-street parking spot. But I think to me, the net goal is to have enough parking. So let's say that there's 50 houses going in, and they're all single-family driveways and a single-family garage. I'd want another 50 units someplace else, so that if somebody has a big party, then everybody's not parking on the street. That's my 2 cents on it.
What are the township's ordinary parking requirements?
For a subdivision plan, it's whatever house goes in, whatever garage goes in, whatever.
Well, let me ask the question otherwise, is it 1 space per unit or 2 spaces per unit?
I'm gonna go with 1. I'm not sure if it even speaks to it.
Jeff?
I'm not sure either, but something sticks in my head, 2.4. Where am I thinking of that from?
I mean, there is a parking section of the zoning ordinance that's more geared for commercial and industrial, schools and things of that nature, but.
I don't know if we have anything on residential.
You know, you may be interested, there was a John Oliver show about mandated parking in community, which was very, very thorough and
That's where I was
interesting,
going.
suggesting that there was excessive space devoted to parking spaces. But, I mean, I encourage you to watch it, it's on an HBO, but, it's very good.
Yeah, and the gentleman here has kind of anticipated where I'm going with this, Dan, because I kind of disagree with where you're going with this. I mean, I appreciate that Indiana Township is not the city of Pittsburgh, and cars are more heavily used out here than they are in urban areas. On the other hand, mandating parking at a level above what we would usually do is, first of all, it's costly to the developer, because parking spaces, their structures, you're talking $50,000 a space, but even a surface is still an expensive property. You're also impacting, what we really ought to be thinking about, which is not disturbing land more than we need to. So I don't disagree that guest parking in these sort of situations is necessary. I'm hesitant to just arbitrarily double that number. And I'd suggest, and this is gonna be a radical concept, that this one, you might wanna leave to the discretion of the developer, because smart developers know that they have to provide parking, and they know that they have to provide sufficient parking. And if they can get away with 1.5 or 1.25, that's what they'll provide.
Well, Kevin, we ran into this problem a few years back where it was a single-family residence. I think they had 4 or 5 cars in a 2-car garage. Most of their cars ended up on the street, which inhibits
Yeah.
emergency vehicle access, especially if they parked on both sides. At that point, you can't even get a fire truck between the two unless somebody's up on the grass. Okay, so that's where a lot of this is coming from. So we do need some additional parking for guests.
No, and I'm not opposed, I understand, I'm not opposed to providing guest parking. I guess what I'm hesitant to agree to is just arbitrarily doubling the number and then saying that's where the guests have to go.
Well, I'm not trying to double it, I'm just saying that I think 2 per house is the right mix, but I will check the zoning ordinance, the current one, to see what's required.
So 2 per house, if you have a 2-car garage, then that would satisfy it to that.
Sure.
Okay.
So what that would do, backhandedly, it would tell the developers to put in 2-car garages.
Okay.
Is what it would force them to do.
Even so, we have a trend today where people don't park their cars in the garage, they put all this junk in the garage.
That's an old trend.
Guilty as charged.
That's been around for a while, yeah.
But if
I
you-
mean, I like the idea of us putting in additional parking's required, and maybe we can come back and
Okay.
talk about how much additional parking after we get the majority of this ironed out.
Okay.
And we had some citizens come to an earlier meeting and complain about this very problem in their development. There were so many cars parked on the street, they couldn't get in and out easily, et cetera. So I'd like to be somewhat responsive to that.
Especially when people park opposite the person's driveway, it's kind of hard to back out.
Yeah.
But let me see what our current zoning ordinance says.
Yeah.
It may already cover it, Kevin.
But, right, and I don't wanna make this more, difficult than it needs to be, but maybe the way to address it is to obligate the developer to provide a parking study that would demonstrate that there's sufficient parking in the development to avoid parking on the street.
But to your point also, if the zoning ordinance already says something about it,
Yeah.
the 2 need to dovetail.
Right.
So whatever it is, they need to match. And then the last part of the sentence where it says lighting is controlled, I would put the word shielded, so that no, I'm sorry, the very last sentence of the same, the red part, says lighting is controlled.
Lanes control.
I would put the word shielded there, and after, so as not to glare on, I'd put down any properties, and I would make it inside and outside the PRD. Inside, / outside the PRD.
That's a good change.
So if they're putting lighting in, I personally don't care whether it's inside, outside. If you're gonna tick somebody off, so to speak. This is tough, I got a whole group here, I gotta be careful what I say. Yes, as long as we don't tick anybody off. That'd be the only suggestion I would do there.
Okay.
Height limitations, I'm good. Pre-application, I was good.
Page 9. Haven't seen any problems there with anything.
With B, B item 1, if the project is anticipated to generate more than 100, I would cross out new entering or exiting trips. It's 100 trips. Because what you, by putting the word new entering, then the word or, to me, that would be 50 in, 50 out. And I want the peak 100. That way it dovetails with the saldo.
So just take out the new.
Take out new entering or exiting trips, just 100 trips per day period. The next part I highlighted is that, that in the traffic study, you want the study to address the opening year, the 5-year, and the 10-year projections. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even know what those are. And I've been your engineer for 40 years. But I would take out and requirements. I would take out the including open.
No, I believe those in, yeah.
Okay.
They're, I don't wanna say this politely to any traffic engineers in the room. Every traffic analysis that I've ever read, includes projections on future growth. I think PennDOT requires it. And I think it's industry standard that those be on a 5 and 10-year basis. I think that's how the Southwest Pennsylvania Commission, looks at streets. So, I don't think there's any problem with having, projections of that type. Frankly, I think we need it.
Then moving down to 2, our saldo talks about 6 or 8-inch diameter trees, not 6.
You wanna make that 8?
I would, to make it dovetail with the saldo, yes.
Is there any reason we can't be more strict than the saldo though?
I'm just gonna say, which one does he follow?
Well, it seems to me if they're applying for a PRD, they have to follow this one.
The only thing is our catch-all for the PRD goes with subdivisions included. At least it wasn't, historically, right? So like, if there wasn't something specific in the PRD, the township subdivision ordinance would control. So, to your question, you can do whatever you want, but you just wanna make it clear that you probably wanna identify it as such.
Pardon?
You can do whatever you want, but I think you just wanna identify it as this would supersede any
Yes.
other something,
Yes.
It doesn't, but, cause in a lot of ones I know you're thinking of, it takes over, it obviously takes over the zoning.
Right.
It just assumes the zoning, but it doesn't necessarily on the subdivision, on the, saldo.
Well, I'd like to see stricter controls on tree removals, so I think for a PRD, I think we should specify the 6 inches and specify that that supersedes any, less stringent requirement in solid.
We'll leave it in for now.
Yep.
Let's move on.
So in that same paragraph, it talks about, putting together a narrative that talks about minimizing earth moving, erosion, tree. So just, what if the proposed PRD doesn't minimize, let's just use earth moving, to someone's liking? I mean, how do you define whether it's minimizing earth moving or not?
Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize the conversation, but, and I don't mean this, too cynically, Dan, but isn't that your job? I mean, if an engineer comes in with a, proposal to move dirt that, you think can be improved, shouldn't you say that?
Well, what guidelines would I use to sit there and say, well, whatever, moving 20% versus 80% is good or not? If I was the developer, I'm gonna come in and move whatever's required to put my development in. I can tell you that we wrote the saldo with the tree section in it specifically to penalize the developer for removing a lot of trees, which goes hand in hand with earth moving. So, I mean, it's the more land he disturbs, the more trees he cuts down. I mean, he's well into six figures, to pay the township. I'm just saying, it's just a rhetorical question, is it, you know, what if he doesn't minimize or minimize the tree clearing? I'm just, anyways.
Excuse me, quick question, Dave. Earlier, we talked about MS4, stormwater, and my you know, I'm not a farmer, but I did go to Purdue, and the largest department is agriculture, so that's neither here nor there. But if we allow more clearing of land, then that creates an issue about absorbing rainwater. You know, because trees and stuff like that, that's what they do. So, I mean, the more the developer clears, the more of an issue we could be creating.
Oh, I agree. And hence the reason why we put together that section in the saldo that severely penalizes the contractor or developer for cutting them down. Number two is that we also have a tree replanting requirement by the developer. So many trees in the backyard, so many trees in the front, and things of this nature, because, well, let me ask everybody here, does everybody like to mow their grass, or do you mow around your trees? Or don't you have any trees?
Mulch and
No
trim.
May. Try it.
Mulch and trim around the trees, cut around the trees.
Okay.
But the other point I wanted to make is, as a contractor, why would you wanna move any extra dirt? You wanna minimize your moves. So it's up to them, the more they move, the more they're gonna have to cost and replace.
Well, I think what a developer wants to do is build flat building lots. So he can sit there and say, okay, you know, this pad, they call it, obviously, is a building pad. This is where you're gonna put your house. But, no, I agree, it costs money, it costs a lot of money to move dirt. But I'm okay, it was just a rhetorical comment. Moving on down to number 4, the applicant, second sentence there, the applicant shall be accompanied by an escrow deposit. I struck out, as determined, I put the word established, by the township. Because every year they, establish a fee structure. Okay, but as determined is fine too, I guess. Yeah. So the planning commission, the last paragraph there, the planning commission shall be responsible for the initial review, the application, preliminary development, and all supporting materials required in the article. And based on the review, shall provide recommendations and propose conditions to the supervisors, for their consideration. I'm okay with that. And then the next page, however, the PRDs will only be approved by the township supervisors in its sole discretion. What if a PRD is denied?
That means they exercise their discretion to deny it.
Okay.
Makes you feel really nice, say, I'll be approved or denied by the township board of supervisors.
You could say decided, but it's, you know, I don't think, I think it's fine as it is, but it's up to you.
Okay, it's fine with me. Like I said, I was just reading through a quick number. In development plans, number 3, 6-inch tree versus 8. I think we kind of walked through that one. The last one is if the development plan requires disturbance of wooded or other sensitive natural areas, how will the PRD, forget it. Oh, I'm sorry. So, the next page talks about all these, guidelines and the following principles. Let me enlarge it, read it, but I guess my point there is that what if they don't mitigate the tree removal to whosever likings it is that we're looking at? I'll take a look at it.
Well, that would be a factor in whether we approve it or not.
Excuse me, Dan, could I ask a quick question?
Yep.
Lately, we've had these, severe storms, and when I'm in my office, you know, the trees are kind of bending sideways, okay? But have we taken into consideration the concept of more severe weather and how we can try to protect our residents and help developers?
So along that line, the stormwater management ordinances that we just updated recently, require the ponds to be bigger, the release rates to be less. So yes, we've compensated for that in Act 167. In addition to that, what is now required is that the first, it's either 20% or 25% of the rainwater cannot be discharged at all. It has to be absorbed back into the ground. The reason being is to recharge our well systems. So as more people suck water out, we wanna make a concerted effort to push it back in. So yeah, we've taken some major steps along that line, which dovetails with MS4. Numbers, what is it, 8? Documentation from the appropriate municipal or public authority establishing the availability and adequate, I put down adequate instead of sufficient. There's my thought there. Number 10, documentation of any, I struck out unmitigated stormwater and put down documentation of any stormwater shall discharge directly into a receiving stream without impacting the downstream resident. One of the things that we need to reinforce, in here, at least my opinion, is when a developer comes in and develops a piece of property, he's gonna discharge the water that all the roads and houses are gonna create into that detention basin. We need to make sure that there's a sentence in here someplace that forces him to discharge it into a receiving stream. You just can't discharge it over the hill. It has to go into a receiving stream. And that's what that sentence kind of does. And obviously you can't impact the downstream properties by not doing that.
So you would take out unmitigated there, and then you would change
Documentation, yeah, documentation that any stormwater shall discharge directly into a receiving stream without impacting the downstream properties. Documentation that any stormwater shall discharge directly, that's discharge singular, directly into a receiving stream without impacting the downstream properties. The rest of that's okay for me. On page 12, at the very top, is a repeat from page 9, item B2. Just says it a little bit differently. Page 9?
Page 12.
Oh, I'm sorry, on the top of page 12, that top sentence is a repeat from B2 on page 9. About a written narrative describing blah, blah, blah. Just says it a little bit differently. On item D, this is for you, Jeff, where it starts off with, the zoning officer or the township engineer shall forward a complete set of plans to the Allegheny County Department of Economic Development. I'm gonna tell you that I'm not gonna.
You're out.
And there's always been a thing between Jeff and Jackie and myself as to who actually submits that.
We do.
You, it's zoning officer.
Is it,
We do.
is it the zoning officer does it?
Well, the department does it.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, I don't, yeah, just get me out of it. Page 13, I had no comments. 14, no comments. 16, item C, up at the top, a development plan or any part thereof which has been given final approval shall be, it says certified without delay by the township I have executed instead of certified, because typically they execute the recorded plan. And then later down in that same paragraph, it's now. What does it say here? Final approval shall be executed without delay by the township board of supervisors and shall be recorded in the Allegheny County Department of Real Estate. And after real estate, I put down by the landowner. So Jeff and Jackie, who takes it down and records it? It's not us, right?
Never us, developer does.
So I would just put that, now down in recording, it does say that the landowner shall record the approved plan. But I didn't want it to get lost in the sauce there.
Should have by the applicant.
Well, because they use the term landowner and the one down below it, I've used the same terminology.
Okay.
I'm good with the rest of that page. On page 18, item E, right where that's crossed out office, it says Allegheny County Department of Court Records. Everywhere else in the document, it's the Allegheny County Department of Real Estate. I don't know which one's correct personally. I think Jackie may know.
Filing a lien is the Department of Court Records.
Pardon?
This is talking about filing liens.
Yeah, it's a different department.
Which is
Oh.
that would go to the Department of Court Records, not the
Okay.
Department of Real Estate.
I'm good with that then. Page 19, I was okay with that one. And page 20, I was okay with that one. I wanted to take a minute, if I could, and go back to page number,
What if we go back to page 1? Just go through what we talked about last meeting.
sure, I mean, now that I've read it.
Yeah.
And for the audience, is that at the 2 meetings ago, I really didn't have a chance to, I didn't take the time, I have to say. I didn't take the time to do my homework, and I couldn't lie too much then.
So we didn't pay him for that meeting.
Good enough. So up in the introduction, planned residential development shall be approved only pursuant to and in compliance with the provisions of this. The concern I have is that with the word only. Because if there's anything in here that anybody wants to pick at, take you to court, whatever the case may be, I'll leave it to her to, I just, the only part is very defining, but you guys can debate that one.
Herb, any comment?
I mean, there's no other, I think what it means is there's no other, planned, other ordinance, right? So it's in accordance, pursuant to this. Obviously, there could be, modifications granted, that's set forth within this. I mean, I don't know that it adds anything by saying only, but I think it's fine with or without it. The planning commission.
What's everybody's druthers?
I think we can take only out, in my
Take
opinion.
only out?
We gotta put article back in though.
Okay.
At the end there, it's crossed out.
Yes.
This article.
Down in number 2, the applicant then demonstrates, I take out the word then, the applicant demonstrates that I'm not sure what the word then gets you though. Moving down into the statement of objectives, I said this at the last meeting, is that based on the court case that we're struggling through, and again, this is more of a legal question than an engineering one, it's just the way that the objectives are set forth, they're ultimatums. So if you read the heading sentence there, it says, PRDs shall strive to meet the following objections. Conserve open land. Well, if I don't think I conserved it, then, I mean, does that put us in court? And again, that's more of a nerve question than a dance like. And I know that we put the word strive in there to kind of mellow it out. But the only concern I have, and again, this is more of a legal question than an engineering one, is that when we start putting ultimatums and things, are we tripping ourselves up?
Well, I mean, I think, from a legal standpoint, right, everybody, the public, the applicant, everybody should understand what the ordinance says and what the standards are, right? So if you wanna be more detailed and set forth more standards to identify what those things mean or what you think it means or what it should mean for the township, then, put them in. I think that's, cause then people know, everybody knows, what the rules are. From where I sit, I think the more people understand and know, the more open it is, the more there's no kind of secret to what's going on, is my view.
Well, I think it would be an ultimatum if we just said PRD shall meet the following objectives. I think that putting in the strive to, I think we want them to strive to do these things. So I would be in favor of leaving it in. I think that's, we should make them strive to do that.
And I think that's where we ended up with the last.
Well, I think the only thing I would add is based on some of the recent Commonwealth Court decisions, not related to Indiana Township, but just in general, if strive is something that you mean, you may want to define that in greater detail. Like, what do they have, what do you mean? Do they have to do studies? Do they have to show alternatives? Do they make best effort? What is, I think you should define what that term means, because it is, when those words get put in, to the ordinances, it can mean any number of things for years. And, Mr. McKeegan certainly has been through a number of PRDs, I'm not gonna, than I have even probably, but, it used to be that the statement of objectives didn't really matter if you met the conservative, if the applicant met the objective standards, then the non-objective standards didn't matter. And they were just these kind of niceties that they had. And then if they're obviously for modifications, then it's a PRD kind of trade-off, right? Is this something that you'll want? You're asking for a change, so are you giving us more open space? Are you giving us a rec center? Are you giving us new roads, or what other things that would happen in the PRD process? I think that in light of it, you want to be clear on what you're expecting, so people, so everybody knows what they do. So they know if they have to do it. Just, I don't want to analogize by analogy. I don't give law by analogy, but I think in the current state of law, it's important to leave it up to what you want. Otherwise, the Board of Supervisors loses control of the process. They don't know what they can, hold people to. So, for my part.
Are you suggesting, or we not have any objectives?
No. I think I think again, it makes sense to have them as part of the PRD, but I think when, we're talking about striving to, does that mean they have to, what does it mean? What does strive mean? That they have to, do so at all costs, they have to?
Well, we corporate lawyers tend to fall back on shall use commercially reasonable efforts.
Well, that's very, to be fair, that's a very different, that's a.
Well, that's what it sounds like you're suggesting we need to do to avoid being challenged in court, or to avoid having ambiguity.
I don't look at it in terms of challenge in court. I look at it in terms of what is the expectation of the developer? What is the public's right to expect them to do? I think people should know what that is. And so when when we're talking about these things, that's my view of it. I think if there's no standard at all, it makes it very difficult for people. And if it's complete standard, well, then it is. If you want to, if it's the standard that they shall do everything they can to conserve open land, right? Then maybe that's the standard, right? With commercially reasonable, does that mean, well, do they need that extra lot, right? They have to come in. If you say commercially reasonable, then they have to show you their numbers to say.
I thought you would think that's better than just saying strive.
I don't, I just think you have to consider what it, I'm like, again, I think you have to consider what that means, you know? Because that's what comes up, when they come before you, you know, then someone will say, well, what do they have to do? Is it, you know, if it's commercially feasible, that means one thing, right? And that means, can you build the property without it, right? If it's,
Well, we shouldn't have these objectives if we thought they were unreasonable in any way, or not reasonable to expect someone to strive to attain them. I don't know.
I mean, the one that's caught us up was that the PRD, or you're gonna have to help me out with the wording here. The PRD, shall provide a variety of different dwelling types or something like that.
I mean, that's a different stand, I mean, that's a question if you wanna, you know, talk about those particular things, but.
Well, look at number 4 along that same line. Now, yeah, I'm glad we have the word allow for a diversity of lot sizes. To me, that's very clear that the developer has the ability to make it all single family, which is what P1 is. Or you go Indiana Trails, which is a real bastard, and they've got one of each. And it looks like the M&M bag. But, I mean, I think the word allow, really cleans that problem up. Anyways, just give it some thought. Number C, permitted uses. Now we're, about 3 lines down where it says, identified in table 4A below, along with accessory. And there's just too many hands in that paragraph, so I put in along with. Again, that's wordsmithing. Moving on to page, I don't know, in section 402, criteria for PRDs, again, that's just the 6 versus the 8-inch trees. Moving on to what I'd like to do at this moment is skip to page 6, I think that was the bulk area requirements. So what I passed out was this, okay? This is our standard for utilities. This shows a 50-foot right-of-way that's required. Did this go down? Mm-hmm. Okay. So to me, the problem with the front yard setbacks that we're trying to enlarge is, keep in mind, is that in our requirements, if you put in sidewalks, the sidewalks are located 3 foot from the edge of the pavement. So that means your driveway is up against that sidewalk, okay? So the distance, if you take the 3 foot and the 4 foot is 7 feet, 7 minus 13 is 6. So just keep in mind is that before your property pin goes in, there's 6 foot of grass sitting there, okay? So when you're, and let's just look at that table 4B. When we're going from what we were talking about with 25 to making it 30, you have to remember, you have to add another 6 feet onto that 30 before your property pin starts, okay? So now you've got 36 feet in the front. If you left it at 25, it would give you your 30. So just remember where the property pins all start. It's at the edge of the 50-foot right-of-way. So if you kind of left it the way that it was, I think we're there. And if you figure that a car is 20 feet, and that's what I was getting off to with the off-street parking, too, is that if you have 1 driveway versus 2, I just want the board to understand where the property pin is, or starts. It starts at the 50-foot mark. And if you don't have sidewalks, that means that you now have 13 feet plus your front yard setback, which, like, for instance, RE, you're going from 25 to 30. So take 13, add it to, so now you've got 38 feet of front yard. So when you're visually looking at it on the street, so.
Wait a second, I thought Dan Taylor, you came up with these in order to be consistent.
The problem I have with this is the fact that the setbacks are different based on the type of dwelling.
Yeah.
Like if a single family, it says front setback's 15, if it's 2 family, it's 25. I think they should all be 25 or 15. And the same with in the MDR, they should all be 20. You know, why do we make a single family one closer? Because you don't want this back and forth going down the street, depending on what kind of house it is. I think you want the fronts of the house to line up. So what I've saw, basically what I'd say is, that, you know, in LDR, the front setback's 25, and the rear setback's 15. And then in MDR, the front setback is 20. And then it's the same all the way down the page.
So the way that we've kind of rewritten this thing is that the required variety pack that used to be in there is now gone. I mean, I would, this is me thinking, I like Blue Run development where they're all single family.
I mean, that's fine.
And actually, through some of the things that you put in here, you actually encourage that now, to have a common, like all townhouses are all, whatever, quads are all. Anyways, I just want you to be aware of how your, you know, our 50-foot is structured and what that looks like at the end of the day.
Okay, but, you know, based on your description here with the sidewalk and everything, why is a single-family residence sitting closer to the road than a two-family residence or a townhouse?
I can tell you that for a standard subdivision, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it varies in our standard subdivision.
I think, you know, the standard subdivision right now, the front setbacks are greater than what we're showing here.
Okay.
And we're trying to make it a little more compact.
Okay.
But I don't want the street, looking down the street, you want it to look like a checkerboard.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from. Let me look at it in that vein,
Okay.
and I just need to look at that, and
But that's a good goal, I think, that Dan's articulated.
so the next thing I wanted to get into a little bit is on the common open space, that's 6. So we're starting off with 20%, and then what it says here in red now is that the applicant must exclude from its calculation in the required open space at least 50% of the buffer area required under the law. So what I did was I took 10 acres, okay? And then I sat there and said, okay, 20% of it has to be open space. So subtract off 2 acres, okay? 50% of a buffer around a 10-foot tract is 3/4 of an acre. So now subtract off 3/4 of an acre. The stormwater basin is another acre, subtract that off. Subtract off the street, that's another acre. Subtract off the sidewalk, that's 1/4 acre. Subtract off the easements, that's another 1/2 acre. Subtract off the wetlands, that's another 1/2 acre. Subtract off the steep slopes, that's another acre. You've now subtracted from the calculation 7 acres from your 10. You only have 3 acres of buildable property. Now go apply your buffer or your density calculation, and let's use an MDR. So 2.5 times 3 acres.
So maybe we don't want PRDs on small parcels.
So you've only got 7 units that you're gonna build on that 10-acre tract. So that, I can tell you, if I was the developer, there's no way I'm moving dirt for 7 acres. So I'm just saying that the way that I originally conceived it is that we would subtract off the stormwater detention basins and the open space from the calculation. And that pretty much drew you into what I thought the goal was here, was to draw the densities from a PRD in line with the subdivision.
I think you may be reading this incorrectly. You're saying 20% common open space. And right now, I don't think that any of the buffer can be excluded from the common open space requirement. What this is saying is you can't have more than 50% of the buffer included as part of that 20% of common open space. It's not saying deduct it, it's just saying common open space.
Okay, then get rid of the,
50%.
then get rid of the 3/4 acres, and now you're at 6 1/4 acres.
No, your
minus-
common open space is 20%, two acres. Now you can deduct the stormwater streets, roads. I mean, those things can't be included as part of the common open space, is what this is really saying.
Okay, so that if they're not included, then they're, okay.
Basically what this, I think what we meant here is that if you have required to have 2 acres of common open space, there's gonna be 2 acres there, period. Not necessarily, you can't have any, you can have more, but you can't have less than 2 acres.
Okay. But understand what happens here is that if you have 2 acres of pure open space, I agree with it, and then you have to have a stormwater detention facility.
Right.
You have to have streets, you have to have sidewalks.
Yeah, but you don't deduct that from the common open space.
But I'm looking at what the net area is for the density.
For the housing.
Sure.
Okay.
It subtracts off the same, yeah.
Well, we currently don't allow the stormwater detention basin as part of this.
I agree with that.
space.
I would, yeah.
Streets, it doesn't make sense to have streets and sidewalks as part of your common open space.
Okay.
Okay? Easements of right,
But in the calculation, whatever, you take your original area, 10 acres, you subtract off your 2 acres, we have to get done, okay? And then you apply that density standard to that residual number.
I think the only one I think would be any kind of issue here is the easements of right of way, 4 and 5, in floodplains.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe we can look at this in a little more detail.
So anyway, it's just, like I said, is it, the way the original concept was set up is that we're just going to delete out the stormwater detention facilities with the knowledge that you have to have streets, you're gonna have sidewalks, you're gonna have all these other things, and that's the,
And I don't think this changes that.
well,
I mean, you don't want your common open space to be down the middle of your street.
but we're calculating the number of houses that can put on that 10 acres.
Well, wait a second, the predicate to all this is that you're going to develop 10 acres using a PRD. How many 10-acre PRDs are there in the township? Don't they occur on much larger tracts?
Typically, somewhere between 40 to 60.
Right, so if you're starting with a 40 or 60 acre tract of land, I think the comment from the citizens that I heard, which is where some of this language came from, was that developers were including in their calculation of common open space land that they were either disturbing, streets and sidewalks, which they're not supposed to, or land that just inherently is not common open space. So I think the 10-acre hypothetical, Dan, is a bit misleading. Because I don't think anybody's going to develop a small parcel like that as a PRD. They're going to try to get 3 or 4 lots on it, and they're going to probably try to make them as big as those lots as big as they can, and they're going to move on. I think the concern from the citizens was, we have these large tracts of land, we'd like to preserve as much of them as possible, so don't let the developer play games when they're calculating their common open space.
Well, yeah, and Dan had said originally, that the PRDs we thought were intended for bigger parcels than 10 acres anyway. So, we should keep discussing this, but I wanna go back to the 20% versus what you and I had talked about, and some of us had talked about making it 25 or 30%.
Can I just, I think,
But
make
go
a
ahead.
comment here, I think, Dan, I think you might be getting confused a little bit, because you had that calculation of how, of the buildable area. I think basically, I think where we're at is, if you have a 10-acre parcel in an MDR district, you can put 20 dwelling units on there. Not take all these deductions and end up at 16. No, it's just, you're allowed to have 20. How you can figure that is up to you, as the developer.
Yeah, I mean, to Kevin's point, is the reason why you're only seeing PRDs that are in the 50-acre range is because that's when the economics, that's the only reason why they can actually make money for coming in and doing it. That's the bottom line. I mean, there was one PRD that came in that was roughly 10 acres, and it was located, Jeff, on Ballard Drive, but they bailed.
Right.
Down at the end. And a lot of that had to do with the front yard setback, but, all righty, anyways, my thoughts on it.
You want,
Well, we had a note from the last go-around that, there was a suggestion that we go to 30% on common open space, but I just didn't wanna leave that point open. Query whether we're all comfortable with 20, or whether, as some of us suggested, it could go a little higher.
well, I think what we were talking about was possibly if they increase the common open space, allow them to have some bonus units built in. I don't think we reached any kind of agreement about how we would make that work and what would be reasonable. If you went to 30, or if you went to 40, how many bonus units could you build? So we don't want to get back to the point where you got houses almost leaning against each other because you got this, put all this open space around it with, yeah. So that's something I think we still need to consider, if it makes sense to have bonus. I know Dan's concerned about, if you make too much, require too much open space, no one's gonna wanna build a PRD. And a PRD, I think, is advantageous because it guarantees open space in the township, which I think most of the residents indicate that they want. They like to keep that open atmosphere, so.
Yeah. I mean, I passed this down before. I tell you,
You're killing a lot of trees. over
my
there.
color, every 6-inch tree I get, man, I'm not gonna have. Get what they're.
I almost have this memorized.
I know you do. But if you look on 1, 2,
Maybe again, number of pages.
3, 4, 5, 6, the 7th page. That's this one, which is the difference between a standard subdivision and a PRD. And the reason, the rationale behind it. Just, I know the audience really can't see this, it's not up on the screen here, but in a standard subdivision, you have that 10-acre piece of property. And every square inch of that isn't used for a roadway is part of someone's lot. And let me ask, how many people here live in a standard subdivision? Or how many live in a PRD? Couple PRDs, okay. So in your standard subdivision, you own every square inch of everything. And that means if there's a stream going through that 10 acres, somebody here owns a piece of that stream. If there's a wetland in that 10 acres, somebody owns that wetland. If there's some really big trees or something like that, they're in your yard, okay? That's the way it's set up. The way a PRD is set up, and you heard the board talk about open space and things of that nature. What it does is that it creates smaller lots, but it also designates open space where everybody in that development can go, wander through the woods, go down next to the stream. Because typically, nobody wants a stream on their property. So as a result, you've got this stream or this wetland or this sensitive area, steep slope, whatever the case may be, it's gonna be in some buffer area or some open space that everybody can go down and play in the stream. And as a result of that, the give and take of it is that you're on a smaller lot. Instead of owning an acre, maybe you have a half acre or a third of an acre or something like that. You have a smaller lot, but there's open space that everybody can enjoy. I forgot where I was going with this. It started off pretty good, didn't it, folks?
It's the
But,
difference between a PRD and a subdivision.
Thank you. You were telling about the MS4 earlier, weren't you?
She's a smart lady.
Yeah, I know. Anyways, so as a result, you have a smaller piece of property that you're involved with. But the good side of it is that the open space that's left there is predominantly gonna be all woods. It's gonna be places for the deer and all the animals to go romp around in. And again, you get to go play in a stream. Whereas before, it's on someone else's property, you can't. So, I mean, the PRDs everybody, you know, everybody hears that word PRD. It's like, oh, guys, the PRD, gee. The reason why the PRD got such a bad rap in Indiana Township is because the prior, PRD ordinance had some very large densities associated with them. So a developer could come in here and put 100, 150, 180 lots on this piece of property and just crush it with density. What the board, the supervisors, as well as the planning commission, is trying to do is to say, okay, we understand you wanna subdivide your property, but we also wanna balance it in such a way that the pristine and the beautiful part of Indiana Township remains. So that's the goal. But if you make the PRD so unpalatable that all the developers that come into your area push through subdivisions anyways, now you've screwed up your property, in my opinion. So.
Well, I don't
there's a
wanna make it,
balance.
I don't wanna make it not feasible for any developer to do a PRD in Indiana Township, because I think there are some benefits. But I know, some of our neighbors have 30% open space requirements. I'm just raising the question, do we wanna perhaps go to 25%?
It depends on what you subtract in that calculation. If you don't subtract anything, raise it to 30%. In fact, go 40. I'm okay with that, because you're not subtracting you're not subtracting the buffer areas. So it's a balance. So, and our neighbors, if you look at O'Hara Township, sure, it's 30% or whatever, but they subtract less. So it ends up being the same amount of buildable turf at the end of the day. It's just a question of how you structure that balance.
Mr. Slater, sorry to interrupt that. Gentleman in the planning commission, I'm sorry, I have a personal matter I need to attend to. I have a personal matter I have to attend to. Sorry about that.
We'll let you go, Ruth.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Can I ask a question?
That's
Yes.
I mean, it seems like.
Can you step up to the
Yeah,
microphone, please?
Sorry.
That way we can
Yeah.
get you recorded and everything.
Okay.
Please state your
I'm
name and
Elizabeth
address.
Eubanger, 321 Blue Red Road. But it's just a question, actually. It seems, Mr. Slagle's concerns have to do with the buffer and how it's treated in the calculation of open space, particularly in a smaller, PRD acreage. Can you have, you only have a buffer requirement if the PRD is above a certain size? And then, cause a small PRD, you might not need the buffer around it, whereas a really large,
Well,
100-acre thing, then
and a
you do.
minimum of PRD has to be 10 acres. Now, in an MDR district, that's 20 residences. And if you do two-family residences, I think it's a little bit more allowed. But,
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about having the buffer only apply to larger,
well, part of the,
physically larger.
not necessarily the buffer, we want common open space. Because that's to be used by the residents and their guests. And one of the complaints we've always had is, well, the land that's too steep to develop, they call that common open space, that no one can really use it except for look at the trees and the brush growing on it. So we're trying to craft this so it doesn't go that way.
Yeah, I'm not trying to suggest that this is gonna be solved tonight. I'm just throwing it out there as a way to
Yeah, I see your
potentially.
point, yeah.
Well, let me just add on to kind of what you said, but what the board put in here, is if you look at that same page on where it says, table 4A,
Okay?
if you take all the crap that I just said and throw it out the window, and you look at the one sentence that you guys put in there, no dwelling unit type can exceed 25% of the total dwelling units except for single family. Or, I guess, I read that wrong, but what I was gonna say is, what if you put a sentence in there that says, that no PRD can exceed, 1.25 of a subdivision plan, which is where you're kind of getting it to. Is it if on that 10 acres, you can allow 20 lots, I don't really care what calculation you wanna use or what lot size you make, but you just can't make it more than 20 lots. Is really where you're at. I mean, we're putting a lot of formulas in here and a lot of gyrations that obviously everybody will scrutinize to the nth degree. But at the bottom line is that you just had one sentence in there that says that, you can't put more than 20 houses on this piece
saying is, if it's an MDR district and it's 10 acres, instead of 20 houses, they can have up to 25.
You
With
could do
with the 1.25.
And that would be the carrot that you would wave in front of a developer to go PRD, because just keep in mind for the audience is that you have to go through a whole series of public meetings, because this is a unique thing, it's a change in our zoning. So, does the developer really wanna go through the gauntlet of public hearings and scrutiny and all, studies and all this kind of crap? Anyways, it's.
Something to think about.
Yeah, just, I mean, you might wanna put that in there as a catch-all sentence, is that, you know, at the end of the day, you can't do more than
May I address?
25% more, that's standard subdivision.
Whether it's 1.25 or 1.2 or 1.15,
Yeah.
that could be discussed, yes.
Chris, 36 Windsor Court. So you guys have seen this, which I sent out a while ago. Was it August 2023? So in here, there is this, on page 9, I referenced O'Hara Township has an ordinance, and it says, the maximum average net density by type of PRD shall not exceed 1.25 times the allowable density as specified by the minimum lot size per zoning district. So O'Hara has that exact same thing, right? So they say if you have a PRD, you can't have any more lots than you would have had, I'm sorry, you can't have more than 25% more lots than you would have had otherwise. And like some of the other neighboring municipalities like West Deer are more strict than that. They say you can't have more than you would have, just period. There's no multiplier, multiplier is 1. So I do agree, simple is better, so I mean, you have one sentence in there, it's crystal clear how many, lots you can have, you don't have all these formulas and all these calculations for, adjusting things. I think there's something to be said in favor of that. And this does get to the end effect that we're trying to achieve. I think, question before the board would be, is the multiplier 1.0, 1.1, 1.25, or whatever?
Yeah. We can consider that for our next meeting.
Well, I'd like to go back to the, I appreciate what everybody's saying about multiplier for density, but I'd like to go back, and frankly, this discussion has been valuable because it's causing me to think about some things. The minimum parcel size requirement before you can apply for PRD. And I recognize that 10 acres might have some historic value for the municipality, but we are supposed to be crafting a good ordinance. I'd just like to throw out for consideration, and I think, Dan, part of the problem I was having with your calculations was this where you were starting. Richland doesn't let you do a PRD depending upon what district you're in, unless you get to 25 acres or 50 acres. They then have, much as in this draft, they then have a minimum open space, what do they call it here? Open space and common ground requirement, 30% of the total site area. And they do exclude streets, power line easements, stormwater detention basins, et cetera, which in the context of a larger project makes sense. So I'm just throwing out a question for consideration, which is whether we ought to be giving some thought to whether PRDs ought to be reserved for larger tracts of property and not be permitted, so to speak, if you have too small a piece of land.
What does Richland's minimum acreage?
They allow them in 2 districts, they're RA and RL, it says 50 acres. In the RM and RH, it's 25 acres.
Does it say what their RH is compared to in size?
I'd have to study their ordinance more. I was just pointing that out because it strikes me that Richland is kind of similar to Indiana Township. Maybe it's not on all fours.
Okay,
but-
guys, can we hold up for a second?
Sure, I'm sorry. Passing out the zoning map.
Sure.
I told you, I actually read it
Yeah.
this time. So what I passed out for the board is one of the things that our solicitor asked me to put together, and this is draft, so you really can't show it. But what I did was I've taken all of the historical PRDs that the township has approved throughout the years. And those are the little white hash things. So to your question, Kevin, if you look at the, put mine on there. If you look on the, this right here where it says Farmer Township, everybody see where it says Farmer Township? So that one is Richmond Estates, just to kind of give you, and Jeff, that was like 50 acres, wasn't it?
I think it was 59, something like that, close.
So that square there gives you an idea what 59 acres are. Okay? So, and if you look at the zoning map there, you can see how everything's already broken up and subdivided and things like that. So to your question or comment, Kevin, is you have to take a look at all the areas that are gonna be bigger than that square. And just say, okay, how many PRDs can we actually expect? And in what areas can we expect them in? Because if we, I think what you're kind of you're hinting at here is taking the 10 acres and move it up to like 20 or 30. I think is where you could go.
Well, it's something I want to think about.
Yeah, I know.
Because, I think inherent in a larger piece of property is likely more, wind you want to conserve. You're more likely to have what is want on a 25-acre parcel than a 10-acre parcel, but maybe not, but it's just, I do think that 10 acres, it's only historic in nature, and there's no real substance behind it. I'm sure we'll let you see.
I think that comes from the NBC, it's a minimum to 10 acres.
Okay, well, yes, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you saying, Dan, that we went up to 20, for example, that would be an issue with available land for that?
The only thing I don't know is whether that would bump heads with the NPC. I don't know. Because I know the NPC's PRD, thing starts off at 10. But to Kevin's point, if you look at all those crosshatched areas, none of those are 10. I mean, they're all 50 plus. So you can see where the developer is saying, okay, it's not worth my time to come in to develop this property unless I've got these 50 acres or 80 acres to play with or something like that. So I think just by the nature of the beast, it doesn't. You're never gonna see a 10.
I think the other thing that we consider is some of these larger tracts are really currently going at which public utilities, public sewers, public water. And we the developer is willing to put that infrastructure in just to build this 40 acres of utility.
Right.
Now, that would be an issue too.
You're absolutely correct, yeah. I mean, it's, whether it comes out of the left pocket or whether it comes out of the right pocket, it's still part of the, and just for the audience's benefit too, is that there was a time, and Jeff can, verify this, that when a new house was built in Indiana Township, it was roughly around 280 to 300,000, I'm going back, 10, 15 years. Right now, Jeff, what are the houses going in Richmond, were they over 400,000?
In Richmond,
Not the base price.
probably 450 average,
But when you add
500. Hidden Falls is going for 750 to 800 average, somewhere between 75.
So what happens here is we start looking at this PRD ordinance and how we're structuring it, and whether it's affordable to the developer or not, or whether the developer's taking advantage of this or not. The bottom line is that unless you're making 6 figures and living in Indiana Township, you're not buying a house for $750,000. So you basically priced Indiana Township out of the market. So we don't have affordable housing in Indiana Township. And if you look at our comprehensive plan, that's exactly what it speaks to. It speaks to having a variety of affordable housing. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, the days of going into a house that costs $200,000 something is gone. I mean, I don't care if it's a Ryan home or, I don't know, what's some of the other ones, but the bottom line is that you're not gonna find a house for $280,000 in Indiana Township.
And for what it's worth, I mean, I'd love to see these $750,000 houses. You know, but you basically driven new potential neighbors away from you. I mean, just by the mere fact of what the developers are charging. And to that line, the developer isn't gonna come in here and build a house for $300,000 and go through all this crap, so to speak. So, I mean, I know this planning commission and I know the supervisors are all looking out for your best interest. But again, it's a game of balances. Do we allow the developer to put a couple more houses on that piece of property, which allows him to, you know, to move that 450,000 down to 380,000? Interesting question. On the other side, cut down all my trees, I know, the deer has no place to live. It's just, you know, it's this wonderful balance.
So do developers roll back the price of their homes typically? 'Cause
That's what I would strongly doubt that, they just
it
build
doesn't
enough,
sound-
couple more $750,000
Lots of labor, material, and goods is high, and they get charged for those properties.
And they're gonna go to a different municipality. So the question is, do you want growth in Indiana Township? And I've heard a lot of no's.
You're listening.
On the same token, I think the obligation of this authority, because keep in mind is that there are people that have owned land in Indiana Township for 80 years, 100 years, passed their property down from one to another. And now it's time for them to go down to Florida and retire, and their land is through ordinances, is unbuildable. So, I mean, I understand that new residents don't want any neighbors or whatever. You know, it's a unique balance that the supervisors and the planning commission are going to struggle with.
Can we talk? Review what we went last month, 2 months ago.
I'm sorry,
Open up more questions.
I'm puzzling over what we've been talking about. Yeah, I have no questions at this point.
Would it, Jeff, would it be possible to get a draft with things we decided on? Starting point, but highlight those in different colors, so we at least know what we've changed.
Okay.
And put some question marks for these areas where we still need to make some decisions. Whether it's common open space or whatever. So we have that for our next meeting.
So,
Well, I'll have
so
this
just,
before that.
just to try to summarize, maybe for Jackie, the questions are, just correct me if I don't list these or statements properly. Number one, the percentage of common open space within the PRD. Number two, what should be included in the calculation or excluded in the calculation of common open space. And number three, what limits or multipliers to density should there be allowed for the PRD? And I think underlying that would be my fourth one, which is the one we talked about tonight, which is whether PRD is not to be limited to large tracts of property.
Yes, and I would just add whether we can or should simplify things to some extent with the language. Throwing out from O'Hara's.
That's what I meant by the multiplier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just for everybody's information, I will not drink Pepsi before that. Oh crap, I mean. I was running out of sugar.
It's biocide.
Water.
Sure,
Yeah.
Comments from the audience, don't have it on the agenda, but should have.
I'll keep it quick, because John Newman, 222 Chatham Lane. First of all, I want to say thank you to members of the Plan Commission. It sounds like you listened to some of our comments from, I think, 3 months ago about taking the unbuildable land out of the calculation. I think that's the big concern. And Dan, I know you like the 10-acre example, but I think we are hitting on the fact that 10 acres and 100 acres, those are apples and oranges. And to a certain extent, what we're worried about is 10 acres within a 100-acre larger plot getting 200 units on it. So I think substituting out unbuildable land, that's huge for us. That's probably more important than 20, 25, 30 of that percent of open space. And to the point of the 20-acre minimum, I think your calculations show that maybe we're pricing it out somewhat, but we let the market figure that out. Maybe 7 houses on those 10 acres, if we allow creativity in the spacing on a PRD, which is a concession we're giving to the developers, maybe that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense within the parameters of affordable housing, but affordable housing is sometimes another question that we have to discuss. There's federal dollars, there's state dollars to make that happen. If we want lower income residents to move to Indian Township, I'm happy to talk about that. I just don't think anybody here buys the idea that PRDs are the way to make that happen. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing it in Richmond. We wouldn't have seen it in Indiana Trails. We're cramming in 100 units. Those aren't gonna be affordable. So this is not the cure to that problem. And you know that the more development you have here, the more money you make as an engineer. So you have the vested interest in more development. So if you're gonna invoke heart-rending issues of affordability, we also have to look at other incentives that are going on. So thank you for listening to the residents. Thanks.
Anyone else?
Matt Leverett, 102 Craigmore, that's not my address. At one of the last meetings, we presented the zoning map, and somebody brought up that it was not accurate, and I was wondering, the copy on the website that I'm looking at is from 2007. Is there any effort to update this so that it is reflective of current state of the world?
What's wrong with it? What was, yeah,
If, well,
what's wrong with it?
I understand some, yeah, some of the zoning has changed in certain areas. I think, in particular, somebody mentioned that, the Blue Run development or Blue Run project, came before the commission, and that the zoning has changed from light industrial in some areas to.
That's why it's white.
Maybe your copy is white, my copy from the website is purple.
Yeah, but that's what the engineer's working on right now. Yeah, we already have, that's already in there.
Okay, so
I think
is it
what
gonna
you
be
heard was,
published?
where there was some errors, they were like, farmer was spelled wrong or something like that.
Yeah, it will be great if everybody could have a current copy of the zoning map. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for reading your township newspaper.
I brought it, I was looking for the MS4 and I didn't see it, so.
It's all part of the game.
Yes.
When we talk about housing, the price of housing, I want to talk about 2 buckets. One bucket would be, say, affordable housing. But the other bucket is, where are your children when they grow up wanting to have a home? Where are they gonna live? Now, we could assume that, you'll live to be 100 and one of your kids will inherit your home, but the reality is, in order to allow, you have to have some growth, because the growth comes from, even if it's coming from your own children, you know, and we have the issue of pricing, but we have to have the availability of homes, and we should not be against affordable type homes, because at first job, that might be all that, you know, Junior can afford. Unless you want Junior to stay in, Sharpsburg. Or, well, you know, maybe he'll stay in, the city school. You know, or, you know, but my point is that I have an issue with coming into Indiana Township, turning around, sticking your hand up. You don't want anybody else to come. I mean, the fact is that, look at your own children. Where are they gonna live? Where? And I think that I would like my children to live here, even though none of my kids live in Indian Township, to live over there. You know, I mean, I don't know how it happens.
But the most valuable part of living in Indiana Township is living in Fox Chapel School District.
Yeah.
And if we're taking a big picture perspective, Sharpsburg might make sense. It's where my family's from, that's where my relatives lived 100 years ago. I love Sharpsburg, and they are probably gonna get a big pot of federal money to put up housing where we could have affordable housing, where kids can go to an excellent school district. So that probably sounds a lot better to me. If we want to create opportunity for low-income people to go to Fox Chapel, put it there rather than in the middle of the woods on Dorseyville Road. That makes no sense to me.
Any comments up here? A motion to adjourn?
Wait, I just had one. I didn't know if we were coming back to public comment. Do you need me to say glam again or no? Elizabeth Eubinger, 321 Blue Run Road. I just want to thank the, planning commission for recognizing that, changing the zoning of that particular parcel adjacent to Emerling from flex office space to light industrial was not the best and highest use of that property. And I appreciate your all being responsive to the constituents. Thank you.
Just understand.
It's just
You
a
only
bit- I
recommend
know.
me to tell the supervisors
That's
that.
why I said that's just a bit. We know.
I'll make a motion.
That's why we didn't
to adjourn.
stop.
Second.
Motion, Kevin, second.